All right. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to another edition of Spring Office Hours. My name is Dan Vega, and with me, as always, my good friend DaShaun Carter. DaShaun, how are you, my friend?
I'm wonderful. I'm wonderful. How are you doing today?
I'm doing good. This is our second to last show of the year. Crazy to think that Christmas and New Year's, everything is coming at us fast here. Oof, the year is over. It's just crazy. So yeah, I'm trying to wrap up a lot of things at work. We both have the last week of the year off, so I want to make sure that I'm done with all my work so that I can actually enjoy a little bit of a vacation, which is never easy to do for me. So I'm always trying to find stuff to do.
I get it. I get it. I'm getting ready to head to San Francisco tomorrow. I'm
Nice.
also trying to wrap up a bunch of stuff. Oh, look at my head with the hat. I'm gonna put the hat back on. Like, oh my goodness. And yeah, we're having fun. It has been a fun week. It continues to be fun. The momentum continues to grow around all the work that we're doing. And yeah, I really enjoy what we do. And I really, every day, I enjoy our community a little bit more.
Yeah.
As the engagement has been awesome. I feel like this channel, this open office hours kind of setup, has opened the door for a lot of really interesting conversations, a lot of really interesting use cases. And
Yep.
yeah, and it's cruising right along.
Yeah, it's funny you say that because we sometimes we get questions on the show that we can answer right away. Sometimes we get questions that probably we need to put a little more thought into or ask around. And we got a question. Oh, this was probably about a month ago. Oh, actually, you were actually out. I was. We had a co-host, a guest host, Daniel Garnier, on the show. We were talking about Spring Security. Someone asked me about how to do reCAPTCHA in Spring Security. Like, what's the best approach to do that? And I was like, well, it's been a long time since I've done anything with reCAPTCHA, but let me look into that. So I put together a demo. It took some time to like do some research, put together a demo, and then I just ended up recording that video today and editing it this morning. So that's ready to go, which should go live like tomorrow, which was a fun video to put together. And it wasn't a huge tutorial, but it was a lot of code. So it ended up being like a 45-minute video, which is crazy. Bless you. So yeah, so lots of great, just kind of to bring it back to community. I love getting those questions in here. It kind of gets my head going. Like, how would I do that? So let me like build, let me hack at something
Yep.
and build something. So it's been fun engaging with the community, finding what problems they're trying to solve to make those problems our problems.
It has been fun. I've enjoyed every bit of it.
Cool. So last week we got started on a workshop that we're building. So getting started with Spring. This is a workshop we're giving at a conference in January at CodeMash. So it's a 4-hour workshop. We put together an agenda. Last week we took a look at that agenda and kind of talked through it. And since then, you and I have had a couple more conversations about how that workshop is going to go. So today is going to be a continuation of that. We're going to look at that agenda again. We're going to talk about a couple things that we put together and just continue that conversation. So what we need from everyone here is if you have questions about getting started with Spring, what are your questions that you either have or wish you could have asked when you were getting started? So we make sure we answer those for the people in the workshop. And again, this is a workshop that we're giving at a conference, but this isn't the last time we're going to give it. We've been told that we may be giving this a few more times. So we definitely want to refine this, make this as good as it can be. So please get your questions in around that. And then next week, we have a guest on our last show of the year. Do you want to tell the audience about that?
Well, yeah. Should we leave it, or should we make it a secret? Hey, we're coming back. It's a topic that's near and dear. It's a topic.
Let's do a topic, but no guest. Let's say a special guest.
About data flow. Data flow 101 is going to be the topic. Cool. And the guest is amazing. And yeah, that I'll just leave it like that. Hey, it's data flow. So
all right.
Your data questions, right? We talk about REST APIs, and we talk about how to engage in testing. But there's always a data story. And the data flow story is a really, really exciting one. And I'm excited to get into that next week.
Cool. All right. So I think with that, what I'll do is we will go into our normal cadence here and take a look at the calendar.
And while you do that, let me shout this out. I am constantly reminded how professional you are, doing a great job of setting up. Hey, here's what we're going to cover today, and going through what we're doing. And normally I'm going to jump in, like, hey, let me go. But you do such a good job of like laying it out. So thanks for being awesome.
No problem. Appreciate it. So the calendar, we've talked about this. There are, a little bit less activity than November. November was a huge month, but nonetheless, there's still some things happening in the month of December. So today, Tuesday the 13th, we see a bunch of, Spring Cloud Data Flow yesterday was released. That's pretty cool to see. Yeah. Maybe we could talk about that. So a whole bunch of reactor updates today you could see on the 13th. And then tomorrow, a pretty big day, two pretty big releases. We have Spring Cloud 2022. So we've seen a bunch of RCs for this come out. This is the one release that was a little like on purpose behind like the Spring Framework 6, Spring Boot 3 releases. So now this is going to catch up to that and provide all the things that it needs to be compatible with Spring Boot 3 and Spring Framework 6. And then Spring Framework 6.0.3 is releasing tomorrow. And then that will be included in the release that Spring Boot 3.0.1 happens with next week. So never a dull moment in the spring release world.
So that makes sense. Just to review, like Spring Framework is the underpinnings. Spring Framework is the base for everything. That's why it's released first. And it set us up for Spring Framework 6, set us up for Spring Boot 3, which was released last month. And Spring Boot 3 coming out sets us up for this Spring Cloud release. And there's kind of the dependencies. Hey, we want to make sure that that's released. You can't release something that has a dependency on it before, right? Like, yeah, there's a sense. And then there's a bunch of projects, right, that are in the Spring Cloud family that are now going to be able to update their POMs and come out with the new releases. So yeah, just to review, like this is how it works. There's tons of projects under this big Spring umbrella. And yeah, and it's got a sense to all things. And the thing that I learned that I was really excited about a couple of weeks ago was that we get 2 releases a year. That's our new cadence. So we're getting 2 of these releases a year. And man, that has me excited.
Absolutely.
Next week, data flow. I should have said Spring Cloud data flow is what we'll be talking about next week.
There we go. Cool. Yeah, so I'm interested. I got to dive into the Spring Cloud release. I'm not familiar with everything that's gone into that. But again, Spring Cloud is a massive project. There's a whole bunch of like projects underneath that umbrella. So I know there's a lot going on there. I just haven't had a chance to jump into it yet. So maybe I'll do that and report back next week.
I will. I'll say what I've done. I kind of had these patterns in place for how I do things. How am I doing config? How am I doing security? I've had these patterns. Well, a lot of things have changed. And one of the things that I'm finding out is that Spring Cloud Kubernetes helps even more. So some of the patterns, some of the projects, I was into Spring Cloud Config a couple weeks ago. I got into Spring Cloud Gateway and just really trying to take these to that native path, the AOT processing. Has been fun. I pushed out a Spring Cloud Gateway example last week, and yeah, and it's working. Now I get to go back and upgrade the POMs, release all the things. Now that we have a release, so yeah,
cool. Yeah, and that reminds me, we have some things in the work to talk about Spring Cloud Gateway a little bit more. So if you have some questions on Spring Cloud Gateway, any just general questions about it, things you don't understand, please get those to us, whether it's here in office hours or you can reach out to us on Twitter. get those questions to us because we're going to be putting some things together around that very soon. So that is the calendar. We have one more week. Again, next week is our last week of the year on office hours. So we have some exciting releases next week happening. We'll talk more about that next week. Next, I just want to talk quickly. I'm going to do a little bit of a shameless plug for my newsletter. If you want to head over to danvega.dev/newsletter, I want to talk about this because in the latest edition of the newsletter, I talk a lot about Spring Boot 3. DaShaun and I, along with our colleague Nate, gave a really good talk internally at VMware to a whole bunch of people on what's new in Spring Boot 3. And I feel like I thought that went really great. I thought a lot of the questions we got were really good. And one of the kind of themes that I saw was questions around migrating. So how do I migrate from a previous version to something like Spring Boot 3? And so I shared this in the newsletter. I want to make sure people are aware that this is out there. There is a Spring Boot 3 migration guide, and this is a whole bunch of really great information here. And I think one of the things that we talked about in that discussion was, hey, don't just try and move from like 2.4 to 3 and just like change all the things, right? A couple things you can do is move to 2.7 as quick as you can first. Move to Java 17 because 2.7 supported Java 17. So now you've taken two kind of big hurdles out of the equation. You're kind of on the latest version behind 3, and you're on Java 17. And then it's a little bit more of an incremental upgrade than just trying to like move from something like 2.4. And then, deprecations happen. So if you're not aware, when we mark something as deprecated for removal, 2 versions later, it will be removed. So if something was marked as deprecated in, say, 2.5, or 2.6, that is now gone in 3.0. So make sure that you're not using things that have been removed. So that's kind of just the highlights, but I'm not going to sit here and go through this whole guide. This guide is really good. If you plan on migrating, this is a good place to start. There's also the, the Spring Boot Migrator, DaShaun, which uses Open Rewrite underneath the hood. Is that right?
I don't think it's using Open Rewrite under the hood.
Not Open Rewrite. I thought it was.
It might be, honestly.
We'll have to look. I believe it does.
Awesome.
So yeah, Spring Boot Migrator will help you kind of migrate your code as well. So take a look at that. So Dan,
you've got a much bigger picture. You've got kind of a bigger scope. You're touching a lot of different parts. And I've got this little kind of tiny little spot over here with the native stuff. And I'm having a lot of conversation on how do I migrate away from the Spring Native. So we see that people are using Spring Native. They've been effectively taking it to production. And now they're like, hey, what does that mean? And they have to change their palms. A lot of the native stuff is now baked in. And what does that mean? And I've been answering. I went through and did all my GitHub notification inbox, and I answered all the questions that I could. But that is to say, Spring Office Hours is here. We're here for you. And this isn't the only time that you need to, or that you have to ask questions. We've got our Twitter handles there, and we're on GitHub. We're in the likely places. We're in the Spring community on Twitter and the Spring user community on LinkedIn. Ask your questions. We are active every day, working on this stuff. So yeah,
cool.
Help.
And then finally, I just put together a video on what's new in Spring Boot 3. This is like an hour and 10 minutes long. So if you're interested in checking that out, go ahead and check that out. DaShaun has a link here for a Paketo ARM 64. This is BuildPak's multi-architecture builder. So I know you've been all over the place, not just this week, not just since like the Spring Boot 3 announcement really came out.
Yes.
Long time ago. You've been working on this stuff. So can you just kind of walk through what this is and what problem this solves?
When we check out something today from the initializer, start.spring.io, when we check something out, now baked into Spring Boot 3, there's a profile in the parent POM it's called native. It's that native profile if you're using native. And what that is providing, it's providing an alternate approach for how you're going to deliver your Spring Boot app. This AOT processing approach, where it's going to use GraalVM, and it's going to generate statically linked native code for your operating system, which can deliver the smaller footprint, smaller CPU, and it's going to be good for a lot of use cases, specifically serverless, right? This functional use case. And you can do that command line. You can go and generate that statically linked binary image, but typically you're going to get the builder is going to be included in that POM for that native profile. And if you're using an M1, or you like to deliver things to Raspberry Pi like I do, or you're using Graviton or Oracle's Cloud ARM64, you can use this build pack. It's community, it's my build pack that I'm trying to get upstreamed into Paketo as an example. And it's very similar to what you have upstream with the Paketo build packs builder that you get. And what this is doing today is it creates a Docker manifest, which has 2 layers to it. It's got two parts to its index. One part, if you're on ARM64, is going to use my builder, the builder ARM version that's very similar to what you get on the other side. But if you're on AMD64 or an Intel machine, you're going to get the upstream Paketo build packs builder.
Nice.
So this is something I put a lot of work into, and just trying to bring things as close to possible, or as close as possible to upstream. And this is kind of the output. And we made some really huge progress last week with the help from Salman and, of course, Daniel Makusa. We've kind of made it so that when you look at my version of the builder, you're going to see all of the build packs are there. There's more than just the native builder. It's got the Java builder. It's got the Java native image builder for using with GraalVM. It's also got a Go build pack. And a Procfile build pack, just like the upstream one does, for these tiny serverless workloads. And that latest release fixed something that was broken, the UPX compression. So not only can I make this statically linked binary on ARM64, but I can also compress it even more than what we're getting out of the original.
Awesome. So as you said, if I go to start.spring.io and I just try and run I'm on a M1 Mac. If I try to create a project and run like a -P native with the Spring Boot build image, currently on my M1, it's not going to work.
It'll work, but it's going to not look like it's working.
Right.
Because the emulation, it's pulling down this AMD64 builder. And it's going to try to do this emulation using its ARM64 processor. And it'll take a really, really long time. And I don't know that anybody's waited for it to complete.
No, I haven't, because I had the same problem at first. I was like, why is this taking forever?
It gets stuck. And I know it's at least 30 minutes. I've waited 30 minutes.
Oh, wow.
30 minutes is the number, because I can do it on my Raspberry Pi in 30 minutes. So I was like, hey, why would I wait more than 30 minutes on this M1 when I could send it over to my Raspberry Pi?
Right.
But yeah.
So the answer to that then is, as you say in this quick start, and that's in a normal POM, it looks like this. All you need to do is replace it with this.
And the nice thing is in your POM file, this will get used in both profiles. Actually, you know what? I need to double check that. I need to make sure, I think it does, that this will get used when I execute that native profile. I'm positive it does.
Okay. Cool. I mean, I know it works because I've used it before.
Yeah. So that's
I haven't used today's version, but I've used it.
And the nice thing is if you make this change in your project, if somebody's on an AMD64 or Intel based, they're going to get the Paketo build packs builder just like they would today. So it is the exact same thing.
Cool. Yeah. Shout out to Daniel Makusa right here in Cleveland. He actually runs the Java user group here with me. So awesome. Along with Scott Scheinman. So cool. Excited about this project. What are the plans for the future with this project? What's next? Is there anything missing?
You bring up a very good point, because the discussion right now for Paketo is happening. Their roadmap the discussion is happening right now. Let me grab that link real quick and I'll put that into the chat. That team is planning their 2023 roadmap. And one of the items is, this ARM64 support. What is it going to look like? Clearly, I'm invested in it, and I want to, support it as much as possible. So I would love anybody's support on this, and the rest of the discussion. Go in. It's an open source project, and it's got a great community. Go ahead and read what's on the table, and throw some support behind it. Tell us your reasons. So the plan is still kind of up in the air. I'm doing my best to make an example for what could be done and how they could be implementing this going forward.
Cool. Well, thank you for sharing that with us. I got a couple questions here. I just wanted to jump over and look at. Hello, devs. Where can I learn about Spring best practices?
That's a great question, because today we're going to talk about getting started with Spring Boot. We are working on a workshop, and in that workshop, we're going to go over what would be like a 101, 102 kind of workshop to give you some of those best practices.
Yeah, and I think, we've gotten this question before, and it's such a loaded question that I don't have like an immediate answer to it. So I think something good for us as we're going through this workshop is maybe putting a list together as we go through this, and what are the best practices for someone getting started?
Where do you start that list? Where do you stop?
I know.
There's so much. And again, like you said, is like everybody learns different.
Yeah.
Right? There's some that are video heavy. There's some that are code heavy. There's some that have a lot more reading, and it depends. Right. And that's the nice thing about this community is there's something for everybody. And the bestseller, over on the bookshelf might not be the best for you.
Right. Right. And the result, the number one search result on Google might not have the right answer because it may be old. So make sure that you're reading information that is up to date, because Spring has been around 20 years and a lot of things have changed over the years. So, I think just trying to stay on top of what's new with shows like this, with the documentation, with videos, stay up to date with what's new. And I think those kind of best practices do kind of surface to the top. But it is a great question. We'll think more about that and hopefully have something to share about that.
I'm going to add this Spring Office Hours. So this is a hashtag. I think everybody understands the use case around a hashtag. When you have a question, you don't have to wait for the show. Ask the question on whatever platform. We'll be able to find it if you use this hashtag. And just a validation question. This is something that I went through last week. I was like, hey, I pushed out an example of how am I going to test these native images or containers in general using test containers. And I asked like, hey, is my approach here valid? That's a great question. If you're trying to understand like, hey, what are the good approaches? Ask away. Ask away.
Love it. All right, I have another question here. Has Spring Cloud been updated for AOT GraalVM? I couldn't get the config server to build.
So each project is on their own timeline, and I don't know off the top of my head which ones are compatible or not. But I can say that Spring Cloud, that parent project that just got released or is getting released this week, tomorrow, that is ready for action.
That's why you aren't able to do that yet. So if you're not using like the release candidate, maybe you should test it out with the release candidate, or again, wait till tomorrow, update to that and see if that works then.
So I've got a working example, like I said earlier, of Spring Cloud Gateway.
Nice.
Under the Spring Cloud umbrella, working with AOT and GraalVM. That's out there. And more to come.
Cool. And that's a really good use case, right? Like I know you do a lot of development on your local machine with like larger projects, right? And all these different services. So if you had these like 20 services in an application and you can get them down to that like small footprint and fast startup, you could kick up a whole environment really, really fast.
So here's the Spring Cloud Gateway for me. I want to have security in place and security in auth-in, auth-z, authorization, authentication, but also SSL. in security in transit. So I want to have an SSL certificate. But what I don't want is I don't want to have to create public SSL certificates for all of the services that I have in my project. With Spring Cloud Gateway, I can create that public cert or that ticket with something like Let's Encrypt or other, and I can assign it to my Spring Cloud Gateway application. And then everything behind I can do internally, self-signed certs using my project's keys and secrets.
Yep.
And that allows me to have just that one thing that's publicly available, and I allow Spring Cloud Gateway to route all the traffic behind it.
Right. I got another question here. Well, not a question. Hey guys, love the show. Peace. Thanks, Rush. Appreciate it. Majority of the code bases on the internet are so elementary. Where can I find some complex projects which are actually developed in Spring Boot?
Rush, you're speaking to me. I believe, just on that question alone, I believe that I was in your seat not too long ago, and I too was wanting something that was a little like 200, 300, 400 level content. So what I have been working on recently is I'm going to push out a bunch of 100 level, 200 level content. But then at some point, I'm going to combine them into something that's more complex, something that is a distributed system, something that does have resiliency built in, something that maybe exercises some chaos engineering concepts. It exercises some cloud architecture concepts. So stay tuned. And if there's something that you're looking for, if there's something specific that you're interested in, I would love to hear about it.
Yeah, I would say, I usually hunt around GitHub for stuff like this, especially in the Spring world. I know everybody's seen the Pet Clinic project, but there is a Pet Clinic distributed project, which is managed by, I think, us, and then a bunch of different people have contributed to it. That is an excellent example of a distributed application that uses all these cool things in the cloud. So check that out. Again, GitHub, if you do the right searches, you can find the right things. And I would say complex is really just the accumulation of fundamental concepts, right? So like learn the fundamentals. And then as you learn these little building blocks, sky's the limit is as far as your building can go, if you will. So
can you find a link for that Pet Clinic distributed?
Yeah, I will while you go ahead and read this.
What is the best way to start in Spring for web development and building REST services? Again, you stay tuned to today's show, and we're going to kind of give an overview of what that entails. We started last week with kind of an agenda on how to get started with Spring, and we're going to go into that shortly. And we have kind of an agenda. Here's kind of the topic that we think, and we did it here live. So you can check out last week's show to see some of that. But yeah, stay tuned. We're going to get a little bit further into that today.
Cool. Hoping to see more content on cloud deployments with K8s and Kafka.
Excellent. So not necessarily a cloud deployment, but if you follow along, I've been pushing out content on deploying to Kubernetes, right? Kubernetes could be anywhere. And in my case, it's a cluster of Raspberry Pis, but I'm using things like Knative serving. I'm using things I'm using Redis streaming. I assume that Kafka's streaming is part of what you're doing. And again, the multitude of Spring projects are being included. So yeah, happy to share that along the way as well.
Yeah, and we mentioned an article, I think last week, but our coworker Mario just put an article out on the Tanzu Developer Center.
Yep, it's not there at the moment. There was a glitch. One of the tags got flipped, so it got pulled down.
Well, it will be there soon.
It will be
if
there.
You're watching the recording. And we talked to Mario. We want to get Mario on the show and talk. He is very knowledgeable when it comes to all things Spring, but definitely when it comes to data and Kafka and all those things, he's a great resource. So we'll try and get him on and talk to him and see if we can pull some Kafka knowledge out of him. Cool.
Questions.
So I think that's all the questions I see so far. So what I'm going to do is go back to our screen here. And I want to talk about a couple things. One, if you weren't with us last week, we talked about an agenda. We shared a Google Doc that DaShaun and I were both kind of going back and forth on. I've since moved this to a repository on my GitHub. This is temporary because we'll talk about what we're doing next that we talked about this morning. But this is, people wanted to see this agenda and have it shared with them. So here's the agenda of what this workshop is going to have, what the objectives are, what you should know going in, and then just the agenda of what we're going to cover. Again, if you want to hear more in detail about that, we can talk about any questions you have today, but go back and watch the last episode because we went into that. But there is a repo for that. So what I want to talk about now is, DaShaun and I started talking about all these things that we need to get out there as far as, source code goes. We want to have a repo for the application that we're going to build, both the back end and the front end. The back end's probably going to have a ton of branches. We want to have branches for like, here's the final source code. But, after the first 30 minutes or an hour, if you're stuck, go ahead and check out this branch so you can get caught up. Ways to iterate across the source code that we're going to be building throughout the workshop. There's also going to be things like docs, like where does this agenda go? Where do our notes go for every single hour? Like DaShaun and I are splitting this workshop up. So we may want to have some notes that you can follow along with. All this stuff is things that belong in a source code repository somewhere. The slides are in HTML/Markdown format, right? So all these things are going to go into a GitHub repo. Where do we put them? There's two of us. If I put them in my GitHub repo, then DaShaun's constantly pull requesting into mine and vice versa. And so DaShaun mentioned this morning, well, let's start a new organization. So on GitHub, you can start an organization. I honestly, I've been a part of a couple of these, but I've never created one myself. So DaShaun got me hip to this morning. You just go in here, create a new organization. We created one for CodeMash 2023 Spring Workshop. And now that I think about it, DaShaun, before we do anything, I don't know if we should, maybe we could, so let's talk about this in open. What if we give this again? Do we then fork this organization over, or should this be more of a general
Here's what I've done, and here's why. I've done it this way where, once it's out there, it's out there. Because it's primarily to serve the purpose of the attendees,
right?
That were there are in that workshop, and it gives them a resource that they can always go back to. Like, hey, I did that really cool workshop, and I like the way they did it. They can always go back to it and see what they expect to see the thing that they went through themselves.
Right.
So I do, and if I'm going to modify it for some other version,
you're right. Yeah,
I'll modify it. I can copy. That's the nice thing.
Yeah, because ultimately we will iterate on this, and if we do, then it's changed for the people who were at 2023 CodeMash. So, and I did type 2022 CodeMash this morning. DaShaun quickly corrected me, and I'm like, oh my God, the new year's coming. So this is an organization now, and inside the organization, we can do a bunch of things, right? Like, so we can create repositories.
Oh.
So we can have repositories for slides, for notes, for resources, for the backend service, for the front end service. And now it's all in this one location for everyone to get to. So I thought this was a great suggestion by you, and I just thought I wanted to go ahead and share that with everyone. Cool. So we have slides. Yeah, we have to go through. Actually, I have to go through and create a bunch of these too, because I took that as an action item from our meeting this morning, and that's something I need to do. So I will get to that. In the meantime, I thought maybe we could go ahead and create an application. I figured we'd talk about some of these things that I started thinking about yesterday.
Yeah.
Is that cool with you?
Let's do it live.
All right, let's do it.
So we're doing this workshop. We want people to have something that they can finish. They have a working product at the end. But it's only a 4-hour workshop. We don't have time to do everything. So the plan is we're going to make a front end. We're going to do the front end in some JavaScript framework. And that front end will serve as, the application, what you're going to see. And it's missing the back end. So in this workshop, we're going to build out the back end. And in order to do that, in order to deliver this, we've Dan and myself, we've got to agree on, hey, here's what we're going to teach and here's how we're going to teach it. So we have some options here. We build out the front end. I think that the other piece that comes pre-baked for this workshop is a contract, an API specification using something like OpenAPI. That's just, it's JSON and says, hey, here's the services that this front end needs from the back end. And that's it. And from there, we go in and we build out the back end. What does that look like?
I love this approach too, because it's used everywhere. I mean, it's that API first approach where it's like, we know that we're going to stand up an API for this team over here, but shoot, we don't know when we're going to get to it. It may be a few months from now, but we are going to commit to this API contract. So we can stand a contract up somewhere. Our team can get developing on this without having to worry about the API in place. So if you stand up this API for me, I'm going to start working on the front end, even though that back end service is not there yet. So I love this approach. We used it at the Fortune top 50 company that I worked at, a huge organization. And that was really kind of the approach they took everywhere. So I have created a new application called Runners. That's what we're going to call this app, Runners. It gives it a real 2012 app name feel to it.
Totally Web 2.0.
Web 2.0, yeah. I'm going to create a new package. I'm going to call this model, and I'm going to create a new class. I'm going to call this run. And I'm actually going to change this to a record. I figured I would do this because I wanted to talk through a couple things. So we're ultimately going to be creating a REST API. So we have this API to be able to get all of the runs that we've tracked, to get a single run, to find the longest run, all these things that we would do in an API with a run. But to do this, we always kind of got to start our application with the thought of, how am I modeling this resource in our application? And I started thinking about this, yesterday morning, and I was like, well, what am I going to track in this application? So I started thinking, well, it's going to have some type of ID, right? So I may have an integer for an ID. I may have a title. So I got this from, I have a Nike Plus Run account. And when I tracks activity in there, it says Monday morning run or Wednesday evening run. It does this automatically. We could do that. But for now, I'm just going to put in a title that we can go ahead and save. Then what I need to do is track the time I started this run. So I'm going to use a local date time for that. Started on, and I need a local date time for when it was completed. I also want to go ahead and put these on separate lines for now.
And which theme are you using in IntelliJ?
So this question is something I get every single day. So first off, this is the new version of IntelliJ 2022.3. There is a new UI. That is where most of this look and feel is coming from. So you have to enable the new UI. I also do have a theme in here. I'm using the Monarchy Pro. There's also, I also use the GitHub Dark a lot. So that is the theme that I'm using, but it's all driven by the new version of IntelliJ, which is awesome, by the way. So these are the fields I have so far. I also want to track how far I ran. I want to double back to this in a second. I'm going to store this as an integer for the moment. So did I run 1 mile, 2 miles, 3 miles? Now, first thought is, let me store this as a double, right? I ran 3.1 miles. I ran a 5K today. We'll talk about why I may not do, why I was thinking we may not do that, but we can get into that in a second. And then finally, I need a location. And the location is really just, was it indoor or outdoors? Because sometimes I run on a treadmill, sometimes I run outside. So I'm going to create an enum for that. And all that enum is going to have is indoor or outdoor. So I love that we're on Spring Boot 3. We're requiring a base of Java 17. So now I get to use a record to represent this thing in our application. There's also the idea of derived properties, right? So things that I would want to store in the model, but I don't need to set. So we have a couple of those. So one is the duration. How long did it take me to run? So I can get that by taking the completed time and subtracting that from the started time, right? And how can I do that in Java? I can go ahead and use a duration. So I'm going to say get duration. And so now all I need to do is say duration dot between, and then I can set started on and completed on. So that will actually give me a duration back. From a duration, I could say, give me the minutes, give me the seconds, day, however long I need, whatever like unit of measurement I need. So that's a kind of a derived property. I'm not actually setting it. I'm going to calculate that based on properties in this run. And then the other one I want to talk about is the average pace. So right now, this is going to return an integer. I want to say get average pace. As a runner, I like to know, like, how was my average pace? So if I ran for 30 minutes and I ran 3 miles, my average pace was 10 minutes per mile. That doesn't tell me that, like, my first run was probably faster than my last run. Not always, but sometimes. That doesn't tell that story. That's kind of what you use your watches or your Garmin's for, to kind of track that stuff. But what I want to do is I want to get to exactInt. I want to get the duration. So give me that duration, get the minutes from that. I get the minutes. So what is pace, right? Pace is equal to time divided by distance. So there's our time. And then I want to divide by miles.
Is it time over distance or distance over time?
I thought it was time over distance, but I could be wrong. But that seems like it should work. So back to this. So this would work. This will work if I create a new run and I set it to 3 miles and I say that it took me 30 minutes, this is going to work. It's going to return 10 minutes as the average pace. If we change this to a double, so if we say double miles, right? And then I set it to 3.1, so I ran a 5K today. This calculation is going to work, but it's going to bring back something like, well, if I set the return type to double, it's going to bring back something like 9.6778, whatever the decimal is. So 9.6, that doesn't tell you the average pace, right? It's not 9 minutes and 6 seconds. 9.67, you got to convert that to seconds, which is like 580 something. So now you got to take those seconds and then figure out, like, how do you want to display that to the user? Like, okay, let's get a string that formats it out. All I'm saying is, I think that for this particular workshop, my question to you, DaShaun, is, do we want to get into the business of getting that nitty gritty and talking through some of, these algorithm decisions in Java? Or do we just want to leave it as an integer and focus more on the Spring side than the Java side, right?
I brought this up. I think that it's a good idea to talk about these things, to talk about these decisions that you make, right? And, one of the things that I get from Nate is, like, part of being mature, part of experience is sticking around long enough to see the outcomes of those decisions. You and I have both made these types of decisions before and seen what happens when you decide to choose a double in the place where it might make a problem down the line.
Right.
So I think this is a good topic to bring up, even for an introductory course. But I think we definitely should let them know and provide kind of a heads up. And we can do that with our API specification, that these are integers. This is how we're going to do it. And then that makes it easy for the calculations.
Cool. I just saw a question that I want to talk about. Actually, what is a record?
Yeah. The first question.
Let's talk about that.
This is the first question. Why is the method outside of class? Oh, wait. It's not a class. It says record. That's where we're at.
So let's do that. I want to create just a separate class real quick. Let's just call this, I don't know, runner. Right, who's running? So I'm going to create a class called runner. So in a normal class, right, what I might come in and do is say, let's just do a first name and a last name. Maybe I do have an ID for this. Private integer ID. So in a normal class like this, where we're trying to represent something, we're representing a runner. We have our fields. We mark these as private because we don't want someone to access them directly. So we create a private field, and then we come in here and we got to create a constructor. Maybe I have, so our no-arg constructor is implicit at first, right? But as soon as we override that, that no-arg constructor is gone. So I want to go ahead and make sure I provide one of those. Then I may come in here and provide an all-arg constructor where I can go ahead and set this. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a getter and setter for this class for each of these properties, right? Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to come down here and go, oh, I need to provide an equals and hash code. So I want to come in here and say, all right, yes, I'd like to provide an equals and hash code for this. And oh, I also need a toString to represent this when I call runner.toString, right? So all of this code that is here is why Java's kind of gotten a bad rap as being verbose. This isn't a big deal for me because I've gotten fast enough to be able to use my ID to generate this. But to a new user to the language, this is exhaustive. Like, what do I need all this code for? You know, they don't know how to take advantage of their tools when they get started. So you might be writing a lot of this code and you're just like, what did I write all this code for? It doesn't really do anything. So this is a lot of code to basically represent a runner in our application. Furthermore, this is not an immutable class. This is a class that I can go ahead and create a new runner. And at some point later in the application, I have a setter. So I can change that value if I want. And immutability is a good thing. So anytime you can kind of create an object and know that this object is not going to get changed later, please try and do that. It makes debugging a lot better. It makes like errors that it kind of alleviates some errors that might pop up in your application. So what a runner does, or what a record does, is kind of take this approach and consolidate it down to a record type. And so if you have a normal class and you want to create a record from it, you can, I think there's a way to say, hey, go ahead and move this. I thought there was a way here in IntelliJ to say, convert this to a record. I guess not. Maybe that's the newer version, but all that said, all you got to do is get rid of all this code. And change this to a record. So now basically what we're doing is we're saying these are the properties of this record. So I have an ID, I have a first name, and I have a last name. And all this is saying is that this is giving us an args constructor basically. So we create a new runner by saying, new runner 1, Dan, Vega, and that's it. And now this is immutable. There's no setter. So I can't change this after I've created an instance of this runner, which is a good thing. And there's some more semantics that go into records, and there's like a canonical constructor, a couple of different things that you can do here. But this makes it so much easier. How much less code is this than the thing that we just saw? I mean, it's beautiful. So that's a record. I hope that answers that question. Just looking through questions here. Will this application have authentication or social logins? No. And again, it's just a time constraint. We have 4 hours. But this application that we build, if we have time, we'll throw some stuff in there for it. So we could definitely add to that. If I wanted to switch my service to use a declarative REST client, how would how would I have it retrieve a JWT from our STS server and include it in the request?
First of all, what's STS server?
Yeah, I'm not sure what that is.
So yeah, we need a couple more questions. But this is a good question. We have our Spring authorization server that is out there, GA, and we have some options, and we can definitely kind of show you an example of how to handle that JWT.
Yeah, I see what he's saying though. That like in the declarative, so at least in Spring 3, like if I just declare an interface and it has a method, there's got to be a way to add some headers in there. So I would pass it in a header. It just depends. If you could give me an example of, if you have something on GitHub, and this is the easiest way when you have a little bit more of a like just a one-liner answer. If you have a project that has this in example, and that you could send to us, that I could just pull down and go, oh, this is what you're trying to do. This saves me a half an hour of trying to set that project up myself. So if you have something like that, James, please get that to us. If not, we will take that question and run with it. We'll see if we can't put something together. Oh,
keep going. I'm gonna click through a couple of these. Hey, we're doing good stuff.
Awesome.
No builder pattern on record.
I mean, you can easily add one if you wanted to. So again, no. So no builder pattern. You're right. So again, it's mutable. So you can't call a no-R constructor and then add to it. So you can create an instance of it. If you can create an instance of it and not change it later, then yes, it'll work.
Should I switch now from Lombok to @data or Lombok @data to a record?
Yes.
I mean, yeah, it depends. But yeah, it's an option.
If you're again, that was my immediate reaction. So if you're on, I would not go through your code base and refactor everything that is already working, right? That's a big overhead. It's kind of a hassle. On a new project that is on Java 17 or Java 16 or later, hopefully Java 17 and Spring Boot 3, I would absolutely just use a record. Now, there are certain cases where that may not work. If you're using Spring Data JPA, you cannot use a record with JPA because JPA requires a no-R constructor. And as we saw here, we can't do that because this is an immutable type, right? So in that case, it doesn't work. It does work for something like Spring Data JDBC. So yes, going forward, don't go refactoring your entire projects because of that, though.
Like this approach of putting my methods with my record, can I override methods? Like, what's the angle here?
What about overriding methods? Can we do it directly in the record? What are you overriding though? There's nothing to override. Are you saying like if I wanted to return an integer called get duration, are you talking about that override? Because that's going to yell at us. Yeah, so return. Oops. So that's going to be like, nope, can't do that. Not sure I understand what.
Do we have a size? No.
No.
It's just like your entities, your DTOs, your other objects. Like, yeah, it's the same. So there's no like recommended, hey, here's how many minimum, maximum.
But now again, because you have to create an instance like this, so new run, title is a string, local date time dot now, right? And so on. I mean, if you have 72 fields here in a record, that's going to be one heck of a constructor call there, right? So, models should be modeled around the idea of a resource in the system. Try and break your resources down as much as possible.
What about toString?
Yeah, so you get that out of the box. So let's look at this. This is a good point. This is a good time to do this. So if we build our project, and I just realized I use Gradle because Gradle is the default.
It's okay.
That's
Works.
okay. I just am not. I'm used to seeing the target, and this theme has got a bunch of things going on here. So let's see if we can. So if we look at location, or I'm sorry, run. So this is the generated source code. So this is the generated class. So if we look at this, we see that there is a public record. We have all those fields here. So we basically get this constructor that gets all of the fields that we've declared in our record, right? So we have all those, it sets all of those, and then we have getters for each of those. So that's all I created. And then underneath the hood, yes, we have, I don't know where that comes from. So this is from the record type. I thought I would see it in here, but yes, you do have a toString. You can override the toString if you want to. You get an equals and a hash code and all that fun. So all those things that we had to do manually, you get those out of the box.
Here's a question that I don't know the answer to. I have not been down this path. Can we use records for request body as part of our HTTP protocol? Will it be automatically deserialized?
Yep.
Jackson data binds, etc.
Let me actually just switch to, so I did a recap. I was talking about that reCAPTCHA project I put together. I had a DTO. So I wanted to represent a request body that was coming in that had the authentication credentials, had a username and a password. So why create a new class with all those, all that verbose things going on? Just create a record. So a login request is, I have a string called user and a string called password. And yeah, I have another record here for the response that I'm going to, so these are DTOs, right? And yeah, these are just represented as records.
And that's getting deserialized by Jackson.
Well, so that it is if you're returning it, right? Like just as it is by itself, no. But if you're returning that from a controller, then yes, Jackson's automatically going to deserialize that for you.
Awesome. Yay. We're doing stuff.
Cool. So yeah, I think that's really all I wanted to talk about when it came to this, was just, whenever you put on a presentation or a workshop, you start to fall down some rabbit holes, and it's like, all right, I have some constraints here. The biggest constraint that I have is time. If I put a double in here as the type, I'm going to get the hand raised, at least by a few people, going, okay, let's talk about how we actually get that average pace. And it's like, I'm going to answer that question, but now we've derailed the conversation from what we came here to talk about something like that. So that's why I always try and simplify some of those things like that.
So this is great. We're running up to the end of the show. Again, ask your questions. We want to see, we'll try to get to as many as we can. But yeah, we also have time constraints. So great questions. Things worked out well today. We are happy to see everybody. It's just been wonderful. The show has been a wonderful part of my week. It's something I look forward to every week.
Same here.
The questions that come after and during the show are always super interesting and super valuable time.
Yeah. So again, we won't be talking about this next week, but we do have a really exciting show next week. So next week on Tuesday, don't know what the date is off the top of my head, Tuesday, 3:30 Eastern time. We'll be talking about Spring Cloud data flow with
you're gonna have to watch. You're gonna have to check out Twitter. You're gonna have to check out the website. We have a bit.ly that we could share. You have to check it out to see. It's gonna be amazing.
But in the meantime, pay attention to the Twitters or wherever you follow us. We're going to work on that organization on GitHub. So we'll get a bunch of repos in there, more of these things that we're talking about, the source code, notes, the refined agenda, all the things that we're doing for this workshop are going to be public for anyone to go through. And then our hope is, I just don't think we'll have time before Code Mash. Our hope is to maybe get a version of this out there at some point so that everybody can consume it. So
yeah, you can watch along. I put the link out there.
Oh, very shortly. So there's a question: what Runners app will do? What will the Runners app do? So again, this is in the agenda. We had to come up with an application that we could build. And we had to model something around. And DaShaun and I are both runners. When we've met up in different cities, I think I don't know if it was our only one, but my favorite one was in New York City. We got an early morning run at like 6 o'clock through all of on the outside of Central Park. That was a cool run. So we like to run. So we just figured this would be a good chance to kind of just model this. It's not going to do anything special. We're going to build a REST API and a front end that allows you to say, hey, today I ran 3 miles. Here's when I started. Here's when I stopped. It'll just kind of track it for you. So if you want a place to track your runs, this is where you can do it. Again, I have a watch that automatically does that for me. But again, this is just a sample application, like a real world.
We needed something.
Yep.
And how do we contribute to Spring? That's a good question.
Great question. There is a label, and I always forget what the label is. It's a beginner.
First-time contributor.
First-time contributor. Good call.
Yep.
So if you look at a lot of the Spring projects, there is a label called first-time contributor, and it allows you. These are things that are good suggestions for your first-time contributing to any of the projects.
So the project leads have said, "Hey, here's an issue. Here's something that came in. You know what? That would be a good issue for somebody that's looking to get involved to tackle first, as a way of bringing you on and maybe an onboarding issue. So you're actually getting started with something that's valuable and worth contributing on, not something that's not going to get pulled in, because that's a concern. Like, hey, I've made this PR, and are they going to pull it? And I'm like, did they pull it yet? Did they pull it yet? And wait, and sometimes it takes months, but if somebody's putting that label on it, good for a first-time contribution or a first-time contributor, that's the project telling you that this is a good thing to take as an issue.
And it's not always documentation. It's a lot of time it's source code, but documentation is a really great chance to get involved in a project. Yep.
And anything that you find, any issue, another great way to contribute is by identifying bugs. Using the projects is a great way to contribute. Use it, explore, and find a bug. That's a great way to contribute.
Cool. Oh, I gotta show this one. Thank you. I
thought you were talking about mine. I guess it's more of a sweatshirt.
This is from Spring 1, 2015 or 2013. I can't remember. One of those.
Very nice, and I am very jealous.
We need to make these. We need to get more of them.
Yes.
Cool. Well, I think we will end it. Again, we will see you next Tuesday for our last episode of the year. And we have a really good special guest. So we're excited about that one. So with that, we will see you next Tuesday. Have a good one, everyone.
Bye.